Welcome to the Brookline.News podcast. I'm Sam Mintz, the editor of Brookline.News. We're an online nonprofit local news outlet covering the town of Brookline. And I'm here with Jessica Smyser, who's the executive director of Brookline Interactive Group.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, Jessica, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Our podcast this week is again sponsored by Amy Lipton Real Estate. Amy's a local resident and award-winning realtor at Coldwell Banker in Chestnut Hill, and we'd like to thank Amy for being the first sponsor of this podcast.
We love it. So the first news item, it's actually, as we know, we've talked about, people really care about the schools here in Brookline. So the first news item we're going to talk about is the calculus project removed from Brookline High School after legal threat from CEO. What do you have to say about that, Sam?
We have a special guest here today to talk about that story. It's our reporter, Vivi Smilgius, who wrote the story. She's our schools and education reporter at Brookline.News. And Vivi, I'd love to start with you and just tell us a little bit about what the story is and how it came to be.
Sure. So the Calculus Project is, or was, an equity-based program that mainly operated out of Brookline High School. It aimed to increase Black students' math scores by providing wraparound services like tutoring and increasing community in math classes in Brookline. It was really successful for the first several years that it went on, starting in 2009 and then all the way until 2019 when it kind of fell off. But most recently, the program was removed from Brookline High School and Brookline altogether after the CEO threatened a legal suit against the schools.
So one of the things that I noticed, first of all, it's a great article. It's very long. You all have been specializing in some very long, in-depth articles lately, which I really appreciate. And when I say it's very long, I don't want to, prevent people from reading it because it's very interesting and has lots of juicy charts and details and research, which I really appreciate. Well, one of the things I noticed is that in the chart and in your reporting, there is a big drop off in 2019 that you see. And it's interesting because, what is it? The statistics thing like causation, correlation, all of that stuff. It's pre-COVID that we start seeing this drop off in testing levels. Do you have any information on that and what that might be attributed to and whether that's actually tied into some of the issues that we're seeing now?
I spoke to the director of the Calculus Project's nonprofit, Adrian Mintz. He's the CEO. He was formerly a math teacher and a dean of students at Brookline High School, and he helped start the program here. He says that the program hasn't been implemented the way he designed it in Brookline for several years now, and that drop off in 2019 is sort of the beginning of the end for the program. That's when things really started to go south. Mims alleges that the teachers who were in charge of the program weren't doing the appropriate community outreach. They weren't encouraging kids and families to get involved with the program, and they weren't going to professional development retreats involved with the program. And he also said that in some cases they chose students who would improve more and not the students who were performing the lowest, who might not have improved as much. So those can all be attributed allegedly to that decline.
And just as Vivi's editor, I will note that we tried really hard to get the schools and Brookline High School in particular to sort of help us understand what had happened from their perspective to respond to these allegations about this program. They ultimately did not provide very much information beyond a statement, A, confirming that the Calculus Project no longer is operational in Brookline High School, and B, the head of school, Anthony Meyer, acknowledged that there had been basically a conflict between him and his staff and Adrian Mims, the director of this nonprofit. And that's about all we got. So what I would say is that it's certainly possible that there are other explanations for that surprising sudden drop off in 2019. We tried really hard to speak to the people who would know what those might be, and we were not able to, get them to talk to us about that. So that's what's in our story.
And so now, the story came out, what was it, last week? Has there been any updating or any response from the community that you've seen come in after you ran this great story?
Not really. We've been keeping an eye on school committee meetings to see if it's something they would discuss. And, our story was very widely read. It's one of our most read stories ever at Brookline.News at this point. So clearly it's something that's resonated with the Brookline community and beyond, but it's not something that's being talked about publicly very much. And I just want to note that one thing that I found really interesting about this story was that we've written a lot about the elimination of the Office of Educational Equity, which was cut this spring because of budget issues, basically. And in the context of that, a lot of people talked about the Calculus Project as sort of the alternative, the way to go forward, the way to keep doing work that tries to bring all students level in Brookline schools. Not necessarily itself, but sort of it as a model for that kind of work. And now that it's gone too, it sort of begs the question, well, what is even left for this sort of educational equity work? This is the thing that people were leaning on when that office was gone, and now this is gone too because of this conflict between staff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, Vivi, do you have any other things you want to add about the story that you thought really stood out to you?
The reason that I started reporting this story originally was because of the cut that was made to the equity office earlier in the spring. I wanted to sort of highlight the existing equity programs, and the calculus project was something that had been very widely spoken about. But obviously, in doing that reporting, it became clear that that was no longer something at BHS. So I guess moving forward, I'm really curious to see whether that gap gets filled or what things look like in the future.
Great. Well, thank you. It's great to have a special guest in here and to actually hear from the writer of and reporter of the story. We often talk about some of the great writing and reporting that you have, and as you're assigning as an editor. And we haven't yet had someone in here to actually talk about themselves, so it's really nice to have you in here.
And if you have ideas for Vivi about the schools or education issues in Brookline, use the contact form on our website. We're easy to find. Respond to one of our email newsletters. She would love to hear from you.
All right, we're going to move on to a more feel-good story. Again, people seem to respond when we talk about restaurants. We've gotten some nice feedback on hearing about new restaurants on this podcast. So we're going to make that a feature, I guess. And so we're going to talk about two new restaurants. One is a late-night Yemeni coffee shop planned for Coolidge Corner, and then a new Korean spot on Comm Ave. Tell us more about that, Sam.
Yeah, besides these schools, restaurants are probably our biggest hot topic, something that people want to read most about. I heard both of these restaurant concepts come up at a town licensing hearing, and I thought people are going to want to hear about these. So I wrote this quick story. One of the restaurants is called Arwa Yemeni Coffee. It's actually a franchise of a small national chain with a few locations in Texas and Illinois. It's slated for Coolidge Corner between Lee's Burgers and Maguro, a storefront that many people have walked by. And what I thought was cool is that it's this really interesting coffee culture, based out of Yemen with these spiced coffees and teas, coffee husks, all these interesting drinks that I don't know much about, but also this sort of late night concept that I find very interesting.
Well, we know, or at least I know, being a night owl, that having more options late night is a great thing for Brookline. And this is interesting because in the article, the owner is quoted as talking about there being a kind of non-alcohol based late night alternative, which is really great. And I remember years ago, going to the North End, and they have these cafes that are open really late, and it's a nice like sort of late night cafe culture. And I have also experienced being in Coolidge Corner, which is a very lively space, but it shuts down kind of early. And the couple of late night options around Brookline seem to be more in the Washington Square area. I'm really excited about this, and I think other people are going to be excited that there's another late night option in Coolidge Corner.
Yeah, it's a complaint or an issue that I hear from people a lot that there just aren't very many places to hang out late at night in Brookline. So this place is going to be open until 1 a.m. on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. And you can really see the concept in terms of whether it's college students who can't even get into bars or aren't of drinking age, people who might have religious restrictions on drinking, or just people who don't drink and they don't want to do that, but they want some place to meet up with their friends. So I think between the food and drink offering, this really prime location, and this unique late night concept, it would be very interesting to see how this business does.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking it out. So the other restaurant we want to talk about is a new Korean restaurant that is opening up at 1027 Comm Ave. Can you tell us a little bit about this restaurant?
Yep, this is called Bop Street. It's a mostly takeout Korean concept, but they do have some seating. It's by a local, business guy, restaurateur named Daniel Cho. Seems like classic Korean food. They had a sample menu that showed kimbap and bibimbap, which are, both incredible. I'm a big fan of Korean food. No news yet on when they're going to open, but that's the concept.
Well, the thing that struck me, because of course, like as soon as I saw this, I was like, okay, I'm going to look it up on the map and see where it is. Saw it was Comm Ave, saw where it was. And my first thought was, is this even Brookline? Because it's on that part of Comm Ave that I wasn't sure was actually Brookline. And the second question I had about it was, do people who live in Brookline really look at all these restaurants? Because it's nestled among a bunch of restaurants sort of near BU. People who live in Brookline, do they think about that area as a place where they can go out and have a nice meal?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, it's a really funny dynamic along that stretch of Comm Ave right by BU, where Comm Ave, the street itself, is owned by Boston. So anything around parking or traffic enforcement, that's the city of Boston. The properties And I don't know about the sidewalk, which is right in the middle, but the properties themselves are in Brookline. So they have to be licensed by Brookline. They pay property taxes to the town of Brookline. It's a really interesting divide. It comes up sometimes with places like Sunset Cantina, which had some licensure issues not too long ago. And it's really funny because I think a lot of people say, wait a second, isn't that in Boston? And as to your second point, it's a great question. I mean, these restaurants and businesses that open here, including a couple dispensaries, for example, that are licensed by Brookline or technically in Brookline, but a lot of these businesses are absolutely catering to the student clientele. They're, takeout heavy for students who are coming by or ordering like Uber Eats. But I think there is a whole neighborhood of people in Brookline back behind ComAv in those side streets, where there is plenty of residential areas who see that as sort of an important commercial area for them, and also who see it as somewhere where the way that businesses operate can affect their lives when it comes to things like noise and trash. So I know that the town takes its, responsibility of regulating that street and that area very seriously for the neighbors who live around there.
Well, it's so interesting. Just another thing about Brookline being a interesting enclave in Boston that, you don't really think about who owns what and who manages what. And it's very interesting that the street and I'm assuming the parking meters are Boston, but the restaurant is actually in Brookline.
I think about it a lot, but that's because I have a weird job. It came up recently in some coverage we were doing about pilot payments in lieu of taxes, which are, nonprofits like BU, which are tax exempt, don't pay property taxes, but they own huge amounts of property. So Brookline recently renegotiated this deal with BU for a bunch of those properties on ComAv and elsewhere in that neighborhood for BU to pay this sort of like small, much smaller, but still a payment because it's not paying taxes. So it's a really interesting slice of the town and city for sure.
Well, thank you. We touched on our hot topics, the schools and restaurants today, and I hope you'll check out these restaurants when they open. And as always, it was great to chat with you, Sam, and really good to have you here, Vivi.
Thank you again. If you want to read more about all this and all of our coverage, visit www.brookline.news, where you can sign up for our free newsletter and all the rest. And thanks again to reporter Vivi Smilgius, who was here today.